I think we need more boarding schools in the UK, but not in the way that you may expect. Currently, we have over 32,000 schools in the UK, the majority of those being primary schools, 4,000 of those being secondary schools, approximately, almost 2,500 of those being independent schools, 500 of those independent schools being boarding schools, and 25 being public schools, as well as almost 350 PRUs, or pupil referral units. We have a two-tiered education system, which means that the majority of our schools are provided by the state and the rest by the independent sector. And in recent decades, especially recently, we've seen a lot of backlash, a lot of criticism and justified anger towards the inequality in the UK education system, and particularly boarding schools. For decades, and especially recently, there has been an outrage towards the independent sector, particularly public schools. A key distinction that needs to be made is between the classical public school and the more modern private school. Public schools date all the way back to around the 14th century, but they have a long history within the UK and within public life. There are about 25, and the main almost known ones are Eton, Harrow and Westminster. Rightfully so, there has been a lot of outrage at how much of an impact the pupils from these schools have in society. Out of the 56 prime ministers we've had, 20 of them have come from Eton, 7 of them went to Westminster, and 6 of them went to Harrow. That means that about 60% of all the prime ministers we've had have come from 3 schools. So it's no wonder why people are so frustrated and so angry at the fact that these inequalities exist. But my fear is that in the crossfire of these attacks on public schools, we have also hit the boarding school model. To explain this, I want to break down the difference between the application and the model for boarding schools. In order to illustrate this, I think it's important to separate between the boarding school model and its application. The more sinister aspects of the boarding school application is similar to what I've just said. The long history of elitist schools and the way they disproportionately have an impact on public life. Boarding school model is very simply characterized by smaller class sizes, a better student to staff ratio, living in a boarding house, a single sex boarding house with anywhere between 10 to 70 people your age. This also includes an emphasis on extracurricular activities and a real drive to provide a holistic education addressing body, mind and soul. Now within these public schools and amongst many private schools, this model is used throughout. But when we separate the model from its application, you realize pretty quickly that there's a lot of solutions, potential solutions that we can take from this model. For example, in the UK, we have a huge problem with what's known as a prison pipeline. The old head of the prison service, Martin Leary, said that once you kick a kid out of school, you may as well do their paperwork there and then. That is because almost 50%, 47% of all people in prison were kicked out of school. Often these kids will go to schools outside of the mainstream system. These are called pupil referral units, from £10,000 to the taxpayer all the way up to £250,000. So the social indicators of violent crime are relative poverty, lack of education, masculinity and exposure to domestic violence. These 4 things have been consistent for about 100 years, and they are, I guess, the symptoms of serious youth violence, and it's predominantly these kids who are being sent to PRUs. Within the boarding school model of having an emphasis on pastoral care, within that having positive male role models, that already addresses our problem of misguided masculinity within our community. You've got the lack of education, which has been addressed because you have a world-class education. You have the relative poverty. You have an alleviation of relative poverty because you have a guarantee that all your basic needs will be met. And you are taken out of a potential dangerous situation where you are exposed to domestic violence because you are living on site. If we were able to take this boarding school model and apply it in a different context, where we utilize members of our community, members of the communities of those who are most vulnerable in the prison pipeline, like I was explaining. And we use those people to either staff the school, come in for talks, but really be used as change makers within those schools. And you could run them in the countryside and have a similar model which takes away from the elitism and the pain that the history presents. My main point is that I think we should be making more data-driven decisions in our education system. Too often we see things being done or encouraged in the name of equality or against things like privilege, which of course are an important part of the conversation, but are often too general to make real policy decisions. I think we should trust the numbers.